We're live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Kessiker. I'm the operations manager for the city of Elkins. Thank you for turning out this evening for this presentation from GAI Consultants. I think you'll find it very informative. It should last about 30 to 35 minutes, and then after that, we'll have time for a brief question and answer segment. Please feel free to jot down your questions and save them till the end of the presentation so we can move through the presentation properly. I'd like to introduce from GAI Consultants, we have James Yost, Jacob Burns, David Gilmore. This is the first I've had the opportunity to meet them face to face. Everything's been through Zoom and virtual meetings, but I can tell you they're very professional. They're going to do a great presentation for us, and I look forward to hearing the interaction with you all. So without any further waiting, James?
Sure. You can come on up, Jacob, if you want. Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are working on the master plan for the streetscape design for the majority of the downtown area for the city of Elkins. So we have been working on this for about 6 months now, actually. So we have had additional public input back actually in November for the holidays. And we'll go over some of the feedback that we received from then. But that has helped lead us, as well as the city input and stakeholder input that we've had along the way to help develop this plan that we have to present to you today. As mentioned, we'll be able to kind of go through our initial presentation. It isn't that long, so we'll kind of go through it overall pretty quickly. We do have formal plans that are here for everyone to view, as well as the smaller executive summary. That's kind of the one-page booklet that you have out there. And the full master plan is about 66 pages long, and it goes into great detail about all the different things that we're going to talk about today. So that's can be made available, and we'll have that digitally as well. That can be put up on the city's website. With that, I'll go ahead and get into the presentation. But to just kind of cover the things that we're going to discuss today, we're going to go over some of that public input and review that. That way you can kind of hear some of the things that we heard from the previous engagement activities that we've had to date, and kind of let you know what kind of led us down some of the avenues that we started to develop the master plan overall. Then we'll get into the details of the streetscape master plan itself. So we'll break out, it is again a larger area, and you can see over there the kind of the full area that we highlighted for this study, but we'll kind of zoom into different parts of it so you can get a better feel for what we're looking at there throughout the presentation as well. As part of that, we did break out into 2 focus areas, so kind of a phase 1 area to kind of focus in and think about how that might be implemented sooner than later when funding becomes available as well. So that then takes us again to that funding and cost plan that we have at the end that we'll review too. So getting into the public input, so like I mentioned, back in November we met remind me of the name of the facility, thank you, the Arts Center. And we had stakeholder meetings as well as public engagement. It was a very rainy and dreary day. So the amount of attendance was a little bit lower, so we did an additional email activity where we kind of allowed the city to bring in some additional stakeholders that may have not been able to attend that day to provide some additional feedback as well. So just going over, I'm not going to read all of these. Every detail is in the appendix of this report, so we literally took every quote that was given to us, and that is included in the back of the report. But just some key points that we heard. Some intersections was a big topic that we heard a lot about, the safety of those. A lot dealing with the sight lines, thinking about the vegetation or maybe some other type of clutter, whether it's signage or decorations, and how that affects pedestrians seeing vehicles and vice versa. As well as vehicles going up into the where the crosswalks are and things like that. So really a lot of emphasis on the safety of our intersections throughout the downtown area. So that's something that we wanted to dive into. Sidewalks, you all have a really nice sidewalk system for the most part. We have really wide sidewalks in the downtown area that we can take and utilize and manipulate a little bit more as you go out into the more residential areas. Obviously, we have thinner sidewalks, and that's pretty standard for that area, but that's something that we can also look to implement improvements for as well, just to allow for some safer maneuvering. Obviously, we have larger trees out in that area that have matured, and the roots have upheaved part of that concrete or brick that might be in the neighborhood. So thinking about those and then future replacement of those as things begin to age and funding becomes available as well. Railroad Avenue became a good topic of discussion as well. It is a wider road that we have there along the edge of the city, and what you can see, the white line indicating our area that we focused in. So there were some opportunities that we had to consider there that we wanted to dive into more as well, but just thinking about things that we need to call up front was that there's a lot of varying right-of-way distances, so that's where the public realm is, or what the city would operate through, and then what the actual private ownership is. So just managing those and understanding what the city can do, and understanding that there would need to be some public-private partnerships along that area to implement some future design changes. We also considered expanding the bike system. You have a really nice and robust bike trail system in town, so we wanted to just see how we can pull that into the downtown a little bit more and connect all those systems together. We talked about, there were some mixed reviews of the test block on 3rd Street. So understanding some things that going in and out and trying to understand the parking arrangements and whether or not the tick marks for the indication of the parking, that was a topic that was talked about in pretty good detail as well. So just thinking about how that could be implemented a little bit differently. And then there was many other discussions, but you can see these are some of the maps that we had here that just showed the different markings that we had during those activity times. And I think I see some familiar faces, so I'm sure a lot of you all were actually participating with us there, and we appreciate all of that. As mentioned, we did hear from additional stakeholders through an email discussion. And then these are some graphics of what was shared with us during that time as well for the tablet square. So that was designed by another entity back in 2018. So we just wanted to pull some inspiration from that as well, and we wanted to highlight that. Some of the discussions that were held in that email conversation, a stakeholder mentioned the idea of possibly doing a one-way loop around town, including Railroad Avenue and Randolph, and then filtering traffic that way. So that kind of dominated a lot of the conversation that we had through that activity. But what we kind of heard was some good and bad sides of that. Ultimately, what the end result was is that it wasn't what was most feasible for downtown and for functionality and preventing any additional traffic concerns. So that was some of the decisions that we had to make in the upfront. So hearing those and considering that was informative, and then we ultimately ended up deciding to keep the existing travel system just with enhanced areas along the right-of-way. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Jacob to kind of talk about how the physical plan is actually broken out.
All right, thank you all. So with the plan, we kind of broke it down into 5 sections as well as the appendix. So, the introduction, that's obviously very basic. Then we get into the master plan, so that's where we kind of get into the meat of everything. And then we have the focus area plans, which, as James has kind of mentioned, we looked at Tablet Square as well as an area we kind of referred to as City Center. Can you hear me okay on the microphone? Yeah, sorry. James has a height advantage on me, so get a little closer here. Okay, and then we looked at materials, so different things like the hardscape materials, our furniture selections, site furnishing placement, vegetation recommendations, and lighting. So that's another large section of the report. Then break it into phasing and cost, or at least cost for a first phase of the project, and then the appendix, which just has a little bit further detail. So with the plan organization, really we're just looking at having a framework for streetscape enhancements. This is to encourage design consistency within the urban area, promoting the cultural and character of the city, and then various improvements within the public realm just to kind of revitalize the downtown core, improve the business climate and business economy, and attract more businesses and visitors, while also looking to increase the quality of life for the city residents. So we include recommendations. We have our streetscape design hierarchy, and then have the area tablet square. So with the vision, I'll kind of read this verbatim here, but it's promote future development within downtown Elkins using a safe, aesthetic, and functional approach to streetscape design while preserving the cultural character of the city. So obviously, they're all very important things to take into consideration, but what we're looking at doing is developing a welcoming gateway into the city for residents and visitors and tourists, enhancing the pedestrian experience within the public realm to promote active and safe streets, creating design consistency. This is something that we always try and focus on because it can be a little bit piecemeal from time to time when you have a project that was here and then a few years later, well, we had a different pot of money. So we have a different project, but we want to make sure that the furniture is consistent, the materials are consistent, and so on and so forth. We're promoting sidewalk activation for businesses and local agencies, and then looking at best practices for stormwater design and green infrastructure integration. So one of the first things that we really had to look at was just the varying right-of-way widths. So the majority of the streets that we're looking at had either a 60-foot right-of-way, which is highlighted in blue on this map, or a 70-foot right-of-way. And then there were different streets like the alleyways that are more narrow, as well as Railroad Avenue, which I believe James had already mentioned, has a varying right-of-way width when you look at parcel and tax mapping. So that's something that you always have to take into consideration. But with a 60 and 70-foot right-of-way for a city the size of Elkins, that's pretty good. We see a lot narrower, even in Charleston where we work out of, and it's something that we have to fight against. But within the right-of-way, we're looking at the lane widths, multimodal transit connections. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a drink here. Sorry about that. And then one thing that we did notice in the street is that there's possibility of the basement access points or coal chutes in some of the older buildings. That's something we find in streetscapes from time to time, that you have to look at that and see, okay, well, maybe we can't do this type of sidewalk in that area, or maybe we have to bridge over that, and then looking at the landscape as well. And if you want to
Sure. So we also looked at, and to understand our streetscapes and what we can do within them, is the average annual daily traffic counts. And so we looked at the states, what they have labeled for that. So understanding those was integral for us to understand how we can actually change or maneuver the traffic. Ultimately, the city works and operates pretty efficiently. I know there's some backups at some of the larger intersections on Randolph, specifically at Railroad and Randolph, so we know that that's something that can happen from time to time. But for the city of this size, the road network system seems to operate pretty efficiently. There are very few one-way streets, which is very nice, actually. It does allow for different ways of traffic, and it allows actually for traffic calming as well whenever you're thinking about that. So we don't really typically add one-way streets overall, because that can increase speeds and then allow for people to vacate downtown a little bit more efficiently. Whereas we're looking to actually bring people in and make the streetscape somewhere that they actually want to be. So understanding how those operate and what those are doing for the city seems to be pretty good as is. So we wanted to maintain that and just allow that to be a little bit more efficient through the overall aesthetic and design. So we did also want to kind of start to break down how we understood the master plan and the build out of how that might work. So what we did was we actually reviewed this with the city and broke down the streetscape network into streetscape typologies. What that means is that we wanted to look at basically what the ownership of the property was like directly adjacent to the roadway system that it was there. So what we did was we broke it down to what we call a commercial core, highlighted in orange. What you can see there is that we're focusing around the rail depot, City Hall, where we are right now, down Davis and 3rd. That's basically your main commercial core that we're looking at in this area. We have transitional blocks. So this is where you start to see some separation of the buildings that are in there. They're a little further back. They might have some offsets that are different than the heart of downtown, which are directly adjacent to sidewalks. You might have some more parking options for private development out there as well. So that's kind of where you start to see where the tighter density is in the commercial core. It starts to break up a little bit more in those transitional blocks. And then finally we go into the blue area, which is those residential areas. So that's more towards the south and towards the periphery of the overall design, but that really does change things. You are now tailoring your streetscape to the residents, making sure that that parking still works efficiently for them. And what we're mainly looking at is replacement and repair and maintenance for the streetscape within that area. So that's kind of how we broke out the overall district, and that's what we might reference it a few times in here, but that's what the streetscape typologies are for this particular project. So getting into the overall master plan. So what I want to actually highlight is we do have the graphic here, and we can talk about that in greater detail as we go through this as well. But it is just a master plan. This is not construction documents. This is still something that can be tweaked further down the road. So it might be recommended here, and it does, again, create that path for you all to follow in the coming years. Master plans can take 10 years to implement from time to time. So things change throughout that. So as Jacob mentioned, we have developed a materials palette so that you can create some consistency as things are phased in the future. But what we wanted to do is create that graphic image for you all to kind of start to guide and develop from, but it doesn't mean that what's on paper today is exactly what might be implemented in the future, depending on the amount of funding a project might have, or that something might change. You could have this massive economic boom, and now your streets are too small, and this no longer works, and you need to expand things. So there's always different things that can happen that are unpredictable in the future, but this does provide you at least a roadmap to follow for the next 10 years, we would say. So getting into the considerations that we took within this master plan, so we broke this out into accessibility, intersection design, green infrastructure, again, that's your stormwater design, considerations and collaboration with the DOH, as we particularly are looking at Randolph there. We're looking at parking, wayfinding, safety, public art is a really great way to beautify the city, and you have some amazing public art already, so it's just exciting to kind of see that develop further along. And then again, that materials palette that can be used and maintained throughout the history of developing the streetscapes. So what you can see here is the overall master plan, and then we did just blow up on the screen here just that core area, that commercial core, thinking about around the rail depot and the intersection of Davis and 3rd. We'll go into those a little bit more detail. So highlighting accessibility. What our main goals are in the guidelines that we're kind of thinking about is utilizing some typical details. So that was one of the things that the city was looking at, was we need to think about some details that we can utilize whenever we're developing and changing things. That could be the ADA ramps that you have at curb cuts. So where you're looking at accessing when you transition from the sidewalk to the roadway, what would that standard detail look like that we can utilize throughout the entire city so that it is consistent and it meets all the typical ADA requirements. So those details are actually part of the appendix as well as this plan, so they're able to be referenced for any future development that is done. We also notice that, or realize that accessibility, it enhances your safety, it promotes independence for anyone and any user utilizing the streetscape. It prioritizes ADA, so that's a big deal whenever we're thinking about the public realm and making sure that everyone has access to that. Especially when we're just thinking about those intersections and the safety of those, and then it supports inclusion. So again, just really making sure that everyone can access and utilize these spaces. Some other things that we talked about, and we might get into a little safety, but is even the sidewalks, while we have really nice wide sidewalks, there are varying ages of the sidewalks. So they are kind of coming up in some areas. I believe we even have like caution painted in some areas. On the ground plane, it could be tripping hazards. So thinking about how we replace that is a big deal, just to make sure that we're making a nice, safe, and easy access space. The intersection design, again, that was one of the big topics that was highlighted. So we have throughout the entirety of the plan, through those typologies, different series of how you would do the intersection. For the commercial core specifically, we are looking at adding bump outs, what we call bump outs, to those intersections. So that essentially allows the public area where the pedestrians go to actually go further out into the roadway in a protected area. This opens up a lot of opportunity for safety as well as stormwater. But essentially what you're doing is you're designating parking as well at these intersections, so it goes out basically the typical width of a parking stall that would be parallel parking on the roadway. So it's between 8 and 10 feet usually, that you're just extending those corners out into the roadway itself. So that's kind of one of the big things that actually help enhance a lot of the overall arching of the plan when we're thinking about those intersection safety, traffic calming, and making sure that we create clear sight lines for pedestrians and motorists within this area. So additionally, when we were looking at these specific intersections in the downtown area, we kind of started to highlight a material that could be used for those bump outs as brick sidewalks. So while the majority of the downtown would maybe have a brick band to just create that consistency, the intersections themselves, those bump outs would actually be full brick, and that kind of highlights a special zone. What that lets people know is that they're in the area where they can now transition and cross a roadway. What it also does is highlight an area where you might want to limit specific things from sight lines. So that could be specific signage or vegetation, or maybe decoration. So thinking about how we can limit those within those specific zones to help protect the pedestrian as well was important to highlight. So any area where you see those full brick sidewalks, we're also making those recommendations within the plan as well to limit and to increase your to limit disturbance of the sight lines overall. So that's some of the things that we're talking about as part of that, as well as new striping. So there's some older striping in town as well. So updating that with the more DOH standard details as well, again, all highlighted within the appendix. So those are easy to reference for any future implementation. We would want to use that, I just blanked on what it's called, thermoplastic, thank you. A thermoplastic material, the highly reflective material, so that again, even at night, this is very visible whenever you're traveling down the roadway itself. Again, tying into those bump outs as well as periodically throughout the streetscape design as well is incorporating something we call green infrastructure. For those of you that aren't familiar with what that is, it's usually a low-lying vegetation area along the streetscape itself. This is accessed, the stormwater runs off the sidewalk and off the roadway through either apertures or from grade, and then is able to be filtered out through plant vegetation that actually cleans out some of the toxins or chemicals that could come off of those roadways before it enters your overall stormwater system through a perforated pipe that would be underneath of that. Again, we have some just general guidance as to how that can look in further detail as part of the plan. But what that would do, we would incorporate those at those bump out intersections, as well as the new tree areas that we can also incorporate throughout the streetscape. So we have apertures, that's where that water can actually filter through those, and it actually helps the vegetation that's within it. And waters that, so you're actually kind of getting a dual benefit of getting rid of the water that's on your roadways and sidewalks, and also feeding some of the plant life that would be able to exist within them. And the bump out specifically, we would always recommend very low vegetation. And we do have some recommendations for tree lists as well, whenever thinking about replacement in the future for those two. We did mention already, especially down Randolph, particularly for the collaboration with DOH. So we highlight as part of this plan specific areas that we want to target. Majority of these are the intersections. We know that D&E is just across the way here, so how do we get the residents that are over there as well as students that are at D&E safer into downtown? So we wanted to analyze each of these intersections and think about different improvements that could happen within them. We do have several that are already signalized, so what we wanted to recommend is to collaborate with them and think about pedestrian phasing. And what that essentially means is, button activated, or actually allowing the system to have a phase within the stoplight itself. Whenever you're stopped, it could be an all stop, and then it's dedicated to pedestrians during certain times of the day. So thinking about those as part of the incorporation and changes that could happen at those intersections, as well as just properly striping all of those in any area where that may not currently be striped. I know that's a little bit more of the boring details of things, but that does greatly enhance the maneuverability of the pedestrians of downtown. So just thinking about getting people to downtown safely was some of the things that we wanted to highlight within that. Additionally, we do notice that down Randolph, we have a lot of varying sidewalks on the downtown side of things. So what I mean by that is they seem intermittent, they're not consistent, it breaks up, there's a lot of parking openings. So we also make a recommendation as to having a minimum of 24-foot wide openings for vehicles at independent businesses, instead of having the entire roadway open where anyone can just drive on and off at any given point, but actually filtering vehicles to enter and access private property for those different entities along that way at specific points instead. Parking is always something that you have to talk about when you're thinking about changing your streetscapes. So we do highlight this. The city has a really comprehensive guideline for parking on their website, and we actually review this in pretty great detail and incorporate it as part of the plan as well. So this highlights different areas where you can park and when you can park. Some of the things that we wanted to talk about is making sure that's properly educated out on the streetscape itself through different signage, opportunities out there as well, because not everyone's going to know to go to the website to look for what's available for parking. So just getting that incorporated into the overall streetscape design through different types of signage at these parking areas is a helpful benefit. But what we do have is, so we have the central business district existing parking recommendations, so continuing with that and just getting that properly signed within it. Additionally, what we see is a great opportunity for railroad here and to actually incorporate parking on the eastern side of that. You will, again, have to do some public-private understanding with that. Just because we do have those varying right-of-ways, we would have to actually restripe that roadway, because right now it's actually heavier on the downtown side. So you only have a lane of traffic and a lane of traffic, and then it's really wide on the opposite side, on the west side of the roadway. So thinking about actually moving that yellow line over some, so you can incorporate some parallel parking along Railroad on the eastern side, the downtown side of things, that people would be more willing to use probably more frequently. So that was one of the areas where we're actually gaining a net increase of parking. Overall, the plan itself is looking at a net increase of parking. The only thing that it is actually really doing is indicating where parking actually is through doing full striping instead of maybe that tick mark design that you see. It's just the small like cross out on 3rd, I believe, right now. So actually doing a full bar stripe so that you can indicate where those are throughout the entirety of downtown. I know meters was a thing that was discussed, whether or not there should be or should not be more meters throughout downtown as well. So that is something for the city to consider, but there were some options. If there are meters implemented, to use card reader ones, because those are going to be the ones that are more utilized, and maybe not doing an independent meter at each individual stall, because that becomes costly as well for installation, but doing more kiosk possibilities. So that you could actually have an individual kiosk for parking along the streetscape instead of having an independent meter. Just general recommendations if that is something that is pursued in the future. Okay, you want to go for it?
I apologize about that. There's a little scratchy apparently, but so we did look into wayfinding as well. So really what we wanted to do was implement a robust wayfinding system. The city has already put a significant investment into wayfinding graphics as well as some branding efforts, so we wanted to incorporate that into the plan in kind of a thoughtful manner. So we're looking at things like gateway signage, which would be along Railroad Avenue, kind of Railroad Randolph, that intersection there across from the Veterans Memorial. That's one area that we highlighted as really kind of what could be the beacon to say, hey, this is one way to get to downtown, down Railroad Avenue. So delineating access points, and then as I previously mentioned, creating unique gateways. We're working to avoid visual disturbance on the roadway. Certainly we don't want it to be like Las Vegas where there's a sign pointing every direction, but we do want people to get from point A to point B safely, whether they're motorist or pedestrian. And then providing connection points for pedestrians throughout downtown. So if you're somebody like me who's not been to Elkins a lot, but I want to find where the good restaurants, where the bars or whatever, but I'm walking around, I can find that with the wayfinding system. So safety, of course, is again paramount to any sort of streetscape project, but some of the various things that we looked at was the enhanced lighting. So you can see some examples of some potential lighting. These features here are by a company called Sternberg, so they kind of take into the visualization like the traditional acorn style lighting that you see in a lot of downtown areas, and then updates it into more of a dark sky light style features. So that's with lighting, we're always going to generally recommend using a dark sky light, something that's just important to us from a design standpoint. James had already mentioned sidewalk replacement. Areas where we're not necessarily going to change a sidewalk width or design or location, let's go ahead and consider updating that sidewalk where it needs to be if there's roots pushing it up. Obviously with roots and trees and different things, that's a further conversation that you want to be talking with an arborist, because generally we're not very popular if we come in and say, hey, let's cut down all the street trees, particularly in a city like Elkins. So, but some of those older trees, they do eventually outgrow the area that they're planted in. So intersection upgrades and bump out design is another thing that James has already highlighted. And then the clear pedestrian and vehicular sight lines. And again, kind of continuing off of some of the other themes and limiting design clutter. So with the public art, it's something that has already, again, been well implemented in the city of Elkins. And we just took a section of that report in the report and just really wanted to expand upon that. So we're talking community beautification, cultural expression, various forms of community engagement, educational opportunities, the economic benefits. If I'm walking down the street and there's a plain building or a building with a large mural on the side of it, I'm probably going to favor the building with the mural. And then social commentary as well. So, it's going to be an important part of any community just beyond aesthetics, but it's always something that we'll take into consideration in a streetscape plan. And then getting into the materials palette. So, if you're on the public works side of things, the materials palette, we're always, or generally are going to want to propose something that's relatively easy on maintenance. So the plan, what we have proposed is, for the hardscape materials, we're largely looking at concrete with using brick as an accent material. Brick bringing in a little bit of the historical element, but not using it all over the place, just because sometimes a brick sidewalk or brick pavement can be more maintenance intensive. Then we're looking into the existing Elkins Main Street furniture guidelines. So that's already pretty well thought out, but just we build upon it a little bit. And then provided some placement guidelines for street furniture. With the street trees, there's a little bit of variance on the existing street trees in Elkins, including some things that I typically haven't seen utilize as street trees. But so we just came with a general recommendation list, and there are some other entities that publish lists, like the Division of Forestry does a recommended street tree list. And then we wanted to get into consistent lighting selection. So I mentioned, where we might see the existing lighting. There's various forms of the Cobra head lighting from the state, the fixtures that they maintain, and then there's different cities lighting, and then I think even some private entities have some streetscape lighting within the sidewalk, if I recall correctly.
Okay, so what we wanted to do was highlight a couple of the focus areas that we were looking at the design. Oh, that sun has hit. I might just be a little shorter for a minute. So this is kind of some of the more appealing areas that we wanted to highlight and talk about as a first phase of implementation if we're actually looking at that. So this is the focus area of Tablet Square. One, I love that name, honestly. When I heard of what it was called and I learned a little bit more about it, I was like, that's a pretty cool space. Right now, what you see out there today is a vast amount of asphalt. So how can we remediate that and actually help the safety of the motorist as well as the pedestrians, while also and making it a more inviting area for visitors? That Rail Depot is where your people that visit the city of Elkins get their first impression. So we want to make sure that that's a grand impression for them. So we spent a good amount of time actually analyzing how this space could be utilized, not only for the roadway itself and some parking areas, but how can we actually make the pedestrian more dominant in this area? So what we did was look at actually realigning Railroad Avenue to where it actually has curb lines, traditional curb lines that follow through, a standard 24-foot width for what this streetscape would need, and indicate that with, besides curb, but with also planting, edgings, and then proper indications where the actual crosswalks are indicated throughout the area. So looking towards the north of the screen, you can kind of see the top P. That would be the parking that you currently have that is striped with the Del Monte. So actually thinking about how we can utilize that triangular space of parking a little bit more efficiently to make it a more pull-off parking area that is utilized on both sides. So you're more in traditional style parking. And then that also allows for a sidewalk to then follow along Railroad on the interior there. And then creates a new tie-in to the shopping plaza there, which the name escapes me at the moment as well. But so all those parking areas are able to tie in together, and then vegetation and sidewalk are able to be incorporated within the area that is currently asphalt today. On the opposite side of the road of that, we do have dedicated bus parking for those tour buses that come in or anyone that visits that area. So that would be on the Railroad Depot side of the roadway. As part of the delineation of Railroad Ave, we're able to actually expand a small little pocket plaza so that they have a nice landing zone whenever they get off those buses. We find that as an opportunity where you could enhance that area with additional brick. You do have some brick sidewalk there now, so just expanding upon that. And what we would look to have within that area is proper wayfinding signage so you can really indicate what they can do beyond the Rail Depot into downtown. So really incentivizing them to want to go further in town, not only stay at the Rail Depot. And then you can also do things such as, so that's a gateway sign, the big yellow circle there, so kind of a gateway element. But you can do also public art as well. It doesn't have to be just a mural, that can be sculptural as well. There are different opportunities for public art that can be incorporated within a streetscape. It's just making sure that you fit the right size and scale to fit within the indicated area overall. So not just limiting to paint on the walls, but also thinking about how we can fill some of these new vegetated areas with some interesting pieces of art that are uniquely Elkins. Again, as part of this, we did bring in elements throughout the entirety of the design. So again, creating some good, strong consistency, but some of the new things that you would see beyond just the general sidewalk and vegetation replacement is the zigzag across the roadway there. I'm not sure if you can see it really well from where you are, but maybe on some of the handouts that you have is actually what we call catenary or string lights that would go over the roadway there to create a strong pedestrian ceiling during the evening hours. So that would be able to extend down 3rd and then branch out as well on Davis and the next area of focus. That just kind of creates a bit more of that premier street and focus area, especially for events like the Forest Festival and the parade. It really creates that backdrop of a space that is very unique, and when people take photos there, they're gonna know that they're in Elkins because there is nowhere else in the state of West Virginia, honestly, that would look like this today. So that's something that we wanted to create, is something that is historically accurate and meets the culture of what's out there today, but ties in and makes itself uniquely Elkins, which was a leading thing. If you read the entire report, I'm pretty sure I say that phrase multiple times. So we wanted to make sure that it just really does speak to this city specifically. And then the other focus area is the next street over. So on Davis is what we're dubbing as city center. It can be called anything you like. But what we are highlighting there, you can see those are the string light patterns that we're thinking about implementing over this roadway here. That would, again, tie to the new post and light posts that we highlighted a little earlier as well with those Sternbergs. Again, just to note, the Sternberg it's a brand that is going to stay around forever. So you never have to worry about maybe this street light going out of style and being discontinued. It is something that will continue throughout our lifetimes very much. So you always have those materials that are gonna be available, essentially. So what we're looking at here is adding the enhanced lighting. We're thinking about new street trees as well, thinking about a bit of a tighter grass on those street trees, implementing a 30-foot on-center spacing for those trees. It just creates a more pleasing atmosphere as you're on your streetscape itself. And then again, one of the big things that you can see here is right in the middle of this page is actually taking that very uniform intersection of Davis and 3rd and filling in the intersection with a vehicular grade paver with the unique quilt design embedded within it as well. So you would have the red brick that is tying into the character of some of the sidewalks, and then doing a blonde brick, which you can see some of the buildings as well existing, and that would allow that relief of that quilt pattern within that intersection there. Again, creating that premier space of downtown that no one else would have, and it would be, again, uniquely Elkins. Just to kind of go over implementation. So again, you can see the large map, and I'm about to be done, I promise. But you can see the larger map of the area that I did focus in. So because of the vast size of the area that we were looking at, we decided to highlight phase 1, which is Tablet Square and City Center, and price that out at today's cost. What we did was we looked at all those elements within that general area, and what we came up with was a conceptual range of cost of between $3.5 million and $4.6 million if you were to completely gut it and start from scratch. So that at least gives you kind of a worst case scenario for cost as to what that could be like if you were to do that all at once. Again, you can pick and choose different elements as part of a master plan and implement certain things. So say you wanted just to replace the street post lights and add the catenaries, that makes complete sense as an optional phase within a phase, essentially. So you can do that at a much less cost, depending on whatever you're able to obtain. And so that's essentially what we wanted to break out. And then as part of the appendix, again, I think it's probably the last page, we do have a unit cost price for all the elements that we included within here, and even a factor for inflation if, say, a project was to happen 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now. So you can at least have a general range of what it might cost if you're developing further out than this phase 1, essentially. With that, I will go ahead and open it up to any discussion that you all have. Again, there is a very detailed report that is available and will be available online. And then the executive summary that kind of paraphrases everything short and sweet. Yes.
I didn't notice any mention of bicycle parking.
Ah.
Now Elkins doesn't have much in the way of bicycle parking.
Yes, so there are different material, like in the materials palette, yeah, we look at bicycle parking, and sorry, I don't think we actually talked about it because you are correct. It was missed. There is a share system. We actually looked at what a share system would benefit for downtown area, which is essentially, it's the striping on the roadway with the arrows and the bike on it. That would actually create a network within the downtown as well. Just thinking about with the parking and leaving lane widths as they currently are today, we didn't find the space to do designated bike lanes throughout downtown, but so we incorporate a share system that actually creates a loop around that commercial core that we highlighted and then intersects it down Davis and 3rd as well. So you kind of have a big square and plus sign to kind of add to that. And then yes, bike parking would be as part of that. So,
Do you anticipate that bike parking being on the sidewalk or incorporated into like an automobile parking space instead?
you can do that. So technically, we didn't indicate that specifically, but that is something that we actually see a lot of. We have, traditionally, you would normally have bike parking on the sidewalk. But we have actually started to see more of a trend with people actually taking up one parallel parking space, putting some in, and even you can add art on the ground plane there too to kind of indicate that that is not an area to be parked in, that this is specifically for bikes. So that's actually something that has been utilized a lot more recently that we've seen locally. So yeah, you could do either. Any other comments or questions? Don't hesitate.
I like the little square you have on the intersection at 3rd and Davis. Is that something you only want one of to focus, or would there be like, it seems like the intersection at Railroad Avenue would also be like a nice place to have the street art at the intersection
Right.
as well. So I don't know, like, you just want one, or if it's a cost thing, or what, if it would be reasonable to add another one in front of the department.
And that's the great thing about a master plan is that if you like something specifically and it finds its or a place elsewhere, then that's always interchangeable. We looked at that one intersection specifically because it is honestly the most symmetrical intersection that you have in town. So it worked out really well for the quilt pattern design for that. Now, take it that if we were to say be able to realign Railroad, then you could make that a lot more square. So you could incorporate that there as well. That would be easy to pick up and change. We did want to focus on that intersection as well, just with the brick detailing of the sidewalks leading to the newly striped area. So it would be very easy to interchange those out into either area. Of course.
I have a question. I know that this is something long-term.
Yes.
Just like what you said, and it would be nice to see implementation of some things. Even the across the street lights,
Mhm.
lighting, can that be done on the street lights that we have?
You would want to see what the foundations of those structurally are. So that was not something that we went into deep detail with, was what's out there existing today. Because you're now adding a new structural load to those lights, you need a light post that can support that string light. Those would have to be very tight so they're not swagging over the roadway. So that adds an additional component to that. So in general recommendation, if I were to do it, I would probably say you want to replace the post and the foundation to make sure that it can support that as well. I'm not going to say that your current post can't, because I'm not a structural engineer, but I would probably recommend that you would replace those two things in order to make that happen. Yes?
Any consideration given to car charging stations?
So yes, that was actually one of the things that was, and it's in the list of things that we heard from the public as well. So car charging stations are something that it's happening, right? I mean, we have to have more of those frequently. We did not indicate on the plan where those were, but they are something that would be recommended periodically through development of downtown. You do obviously have to have a robust system to get the electric to that, so that takes some additional things to build into the streetscape. But you want to definitely make sure that within maybe the commercial core areas that you could consider the electric charging stations. But yes, that is something that was considered as well. Yeah, you can always do those within city, like the city parking lot, right here at City Hall, or maybe one of the other lots that the city also owns. One thing that I'm now realizing I also didn't mention is that you see that we did change the orientation of parking on the south side of Tablet Square as well. That would require a public-private partnership as well, because we actually did cross private lines technically to reorient the parking there. So the two, it's the two northern lots belong to the bank that's there. So that would, in order to make that symmetrical design of Tablet Square, you would have to work with the bank as well, or the trust. But city lots, yes, you could always incorporate additional charging stations as well. Yes?
Can you talk more about the nature of the gateways at Railroad and Randolph and Davis and Randolph that you had mentioned previously?
Yeah, so the thinking about the one that would be on the most northern. So what we were looking at Railroad and Randolph would actually be very complementary to what the veterans would be. So we created a general guideline as to how that could look, just creating that simple arch in the area there. There are a lot of utilities in that spot. There is the transformer box or whatnot for the streetlights, so you have to make sure that that's incorporated or worked around. There was a fire hydrant. I saw that too. But yes, essentially we would want it to kind of mimic what's happening on the opposite side of the road. And then kind of just, you would have your own sign designed that would be placed there. That would be your welcome sign to Elkins. It's a great spot for it as you're coming from Corridor and then coming into town. The ones that would be in town a bit more, we have a few more highlighted. Those would probably be more of a columnar shaped piece because they're in a tighter area. That could be a very vertical post essentially that has some, might say Elkins or something, and that would again be uniquely designed to fit that specific zone. But we highlighted those throughout the plan as to where we find the most applicable for people coming in. We did not design the sign specifically.
There's a mention in your back here about with the way with stoplights and using two-way and four-way.
Right, and I believe that's some of the public comment quotes. And that was one of the things that we did here is, can we get rid of some of these stoplights? Again, when we were analyzing the street road network, we found it to work rather efficiently, especially with the additions of bump outs in the future. We think additional traffic calming will take place because of that. So we did not recommend removing the streetlights at this point in time. We left those as is. Just again, it's a cost savings to not have to redo all of that system. It does function. They are a bit large at the base. That was something that we talked about in good detail, as just the general size. Changing them a bit with the bump outs, you can maybe change out the base of those to be a bit more in scale. But also with the bump out areas, we are widening the pedestrian zone so you have a bit more function to move around them a bit easier. But we did not suggest removal of them at this point in time. Yes?
You mentioned putting artwork,
Uh-huh.
a sculpture or something at the intersection at the depot.
Oh, sorry. It's direct. The little call out beside it, so it would kind of be a piece that could be highlighted. It's not at the intersection itself. It's just, you can't lay it directly over top of where you're recommending. So there's a little call out that's right beside that. It talks about right where that perfect alignment with third would be something that could be a bit more a statue or something that could happen in that point that would line up with the roadway there. That could be public art. So something.
The reason it's called Tablet Square is there was a tablet there.
Right.
Remember what, when it's over the Legion,
Mm-hmm.
or in the yard, could that not be placed?
It could, very well. It could easily go back and be something that would fit in there, and that's why we created that specific jet out in front of where the building, you can see how it kind of comes out a little bit on the road there, and it lines up really well. We left a space there that would be perfect for implementing a piece of art right there, so that would be something that would be a good fit for that reason.
The overhead light, would that impact any larger truck traffic or with like the Ford Festival?
Yep.
Ride?
Yeah, usually the minimum that we require for that would be at least 18 feet, so you're making sure that you're not interfering with any truck that would go through downtown. Usually as long as that's 16 feet or lower is what your typical truck system is, but so yes, And again, those light posts would need to be structurally sound to support that, and they have additional on top to allow for those lights to go across the roadway themselves. So that would be at minimum 18 feet high. I can't say that I've been to the parade of Forest Festival. I don't know if you have any major floats that come down that are taller than that, so that would maybe be something to, huh? Well, yeah, that's true. I did march in the parade when I was in WVU's band. We both did. So we have been in the parade, but I don't recall floats. So if there is something higher, then that's something to take into consideration. But 18 feet is the requirement for what we would recommend.
And we always have Forest Festival banners
Yes.
going across the roadway. So this would be
So does this, address the, also at the Third and the Davis Avenue, all of the different structures that are currently there now? Like, I think you can see the black light post and the silver light post, and there's so many different things happening on that curve. Does it address kind of just getting rid of the redundancy?
Yeah, pretty much. Essentially what we're looking at is creating a consistent palette. Your grand overhaul essentially as to how that would look. So you would change out all the light posts, you would change out all the signage posts where everything is consistent. And then you would create, again, you can see how all vegetation except for like the green infrastructure at the bump outs themselves stops where the brick becomes wider. So that was that zone, and that's 40 feet back from the intersection itself. That would be the clear zone, where you don't want to put any additional decoration, signage that is not meant for vehicles or whatnot in those areas. So that is one of the things that we want to make sure is cleaning up clutter was one of the big things that we heard about, and making things more consistent as part of the design. So there is that detailed materials palette that we pulled from. Main Street does have, again, the furniture guidelines. So we pulled a lot of that as part of what was in the materials palette, as well as highlighting the brick materials that could be used and the lighting materials that could be used as part of that as well.
What about maintenance for that quilt pattern, as far as if we have a water run break, which unfortunately we have quite often?
Yeah.
How hard is that to replace and put it back as opposed to just putting asphalt?
Right. So yes, you're always going to hear that asphalt's going to be the easiest thing to have, but sometimes it calls for special, occasions where we can do something like this. The brick is easy to take up and put that back. It is like what we would produce or propose here is a traditional vehicular brick paver. The one thing that you want to make sure to do is the city would need to be a part of that and putting that back, or just at least some guidance, because in the city of Charleston, I'm not going to lie, we had a very similar situation where we have a paver intersection and they put the pavers back in upside down and it's a different color. The water company put them back in completely upside down. And now if you're going down Brawley Walkway, trust me, I'm not ticked about this at all, but if you go down Brawley Walkway where that new Fife Brewery is in downtown Charleston, and you're walking across the pedestrian intersection, you will see a very obvious rectangular square of pavers that were put in upside down, because you will need to just make sure that as the city, that pavers, they go back in as they were put in place. So if a water company does come out there and take those up, they do go back properly. As part of that, the typical detail for that, and that is again included as to how that is installed, all these bricks are actually put on a concrete base, so that allows for no heaving of any type of root systems or anything in the future. So obviously we do have some historic brick sidewalks in town, and they are obviously coming up in different areas. That just happens. That was the old detail where they were just put on sand setting beds essentially. Everything that we have included as part of these details is actually a paver that is on a brick, or not, a brick paver that is on a concrete setting bed. So it is on a solid base and it should not ever move.
With the materials that we would always recommend, if you're doing like any paper or something like that, is for the city of Public Works side of things, is ordering spares for the project.
Yes.
Done, about the catalyst board. While what we propose is pretty typical material, if you have more custom things, you need spares, so you're not running into an issue down the road.
Yeah, the brick paver that we have here is very standard to Belden paver. Again, another product that we wanted to make sure would last a lifetime, so you know that you can always go back and order more, because that is their pretty traditional style that they would have as part of that.
I think we have time for one last question.
All right, thank you, Count.
Putting utilities underground? Right. We didn't make any mention of that. That would definitely be a very costly endeavor. It is something that I wish every street would do. It is not something that we made the direct recommendation for, though, because it is something that you have to work, especially with, you know, AEP when you're thinking about that, or the cable company that's here. I don't know your local cable company, but essentially those are very costly endeavors, and usually you can't get the power company or, say, a cable company to pay for that, so it would come directly out of the city's budget, and that's usually something that is nixed from a plan pretty quickly, just to allow for some of the other things to happen. Of course. Yeah. Do we have, is it a short one?
Yes.
Yes.
So with your budget, do you have any money in there, any allowances for utility relocation?
Yeah, actually, what we did in the phase one, so we have unit cost for everything that's in there, but in the phase one, we did have utility fluctuation. That would be a number that we put in there, so we have kind of a miscellaneous utility adjustments as part of that, because that's always something that comes up in any type of plan. So that is in the phase one, cost that $3.5 to $4.6 million one. All right, and now I know you have a council meeting. Thank you all very much.